Multiclassing is a huge part of Baldur's Gate 3, from theory crafting to build making and just simply playing the game. Taking advantage of the blend of one class's abilities with another allows you to make some truly devastating combinations, such as the dreaded Bardadin or the all-powerful Tempest Sorcerer. In this video today, we're going to do a tier list off of the best caster multi-class options for BG3. I already did the melee, or at least martial version, as it's also includes ranged, and that will be linked in the description and pinned comment below. Before we get started, let me lay out some ground rules. We'll only be looking at these classes strictly as a dip into them as a multi-class. And what I mean by that is at max 4 levels. Anything beyond that sort of blurs the lines, and it's hard to rate individual multi-classes off of their merits because classes become stronger with each level. The focus here is to help you in deciding which multi-class options are strong in almost all cases, like the fighter, or in particular hyper niche cases like, say, the barbarian. Lastly, this is all opinionated. Your tier list might be different, and this all comes from anecdotal experience. So if you see a class and position that, makes you doubt playing that one, don't do that. This is a single player narrative game. Have fun with it however the hell you want, not in the way someone on the internet tells you to. If this is your first time on my channel, the way I do things is by upfronting the knowledge in my videos, so you can find the complete tier list linked in the description below. From there, you can just simply jump ahead to any of the chapters in the timeline and description to any of the specific tiers to find out my justification for certain multi-class options or what have you. But if you've taken a look at the list and that's all you wanted to know, please feel free to just shut the video down and head on out. Before you head out, please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. All that stuff does help me out in a huge way. I've gone from like 89% to 80% unsubscribed viewership, and every little bit helps. And if you need help too with any other subject in Baldur's Gate 3, check out my playlist linked below. But let's get started here on my caster multi-class tier list for Baldur's Gate 3. So to start us off, let's talk about the bottom of the list, the D tier. And I think a lot of these are going to be kind of without saying, and if you've already taken a look at the list, you already know what's going to happen here. But the first one is going to be Barbarian. Now, Barbarian's really cool, right? You have a lot of really cool capabilities with it, and the Wild Surge or Wild Magic Barbarian, whatever one it is awesome because it can replenish spell slots. But the problem here with the Barbarian as it pertains to a caster multi-class is that you cannot do all the fun things of being a barbarian and cast, because you cannot maintain concentration spells while enraged, and you can't cast spells while enraged. So I think it's kind of a natural pick here to be in. I would actually say this is the only one that would probably exist in its own tier of F, but I have actually thought about really cool ways you could take the barbarian and mix it with the 4 elements monk, and I'm kind of working on a build guide for that. If that's something you'd like to see, go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. But it basically would be 9 levels or 8 levels into barbarian and 4 or 3 levels into the 4 elements monk, because 4 elements monk, all their spells are not cast as spells. They use key points. They can cast while silenced, so you can cast them while you're enraged. So I think that's like the only way I could finally I could find this to be an effective multi-class for a caster. And even then, a 4 elements monk is a very niche pick when it comes to the monk itself. Now, another one here is the Ranger. Ranger, I think, is a really cool class. Like I've said before, it's my main character on my personal playthrough. But I think that what it offers or affords any of the casting classes is just too minimal, especially when with 4 levels dipped into it. Sure, yeah, you get a lot of really fun things with Hunter or Gloomstalker, but that assumes that you're also going with some sort of melee or range hybrid into your casting. And even at that, I'd rather go with any other martial class that can pull more from it. The Beastmaster does get a really good minor summon, but again, I'd rather get the Warlock summon instead, because it can just do a little bit more for me. It can go invisible, it can fear things, stuff like that. So I think the Ranger kind of sits, unfortunately, in a really awkward position, especially because it does pull from Wisdom. So if you're going with the Cleric, cool, maybe you get some spells that you wouldn't get otherwise, like Hail of Thorns or Goodberry. But if you're going with a Druid, you're just going to get better versions of those on a Druid. So I think the Ranger, unfortunately, sits down here. And unfortunately, too, also the Druid sits down here, because with 4 levels of Druid action, you're just not going to get enough. I do think with the land Druid, you can get access to, Hold Person, Misty Step, Spike Growth, all those pretty quick in the game, right? 3 levels in, that's when you get those. And that's a pretty great little jump. But I just don't see them as, if I'm going with a caster, I can pull it in from a wizard, from a scroll. If I'm a warlock, I'm going to get it. There's just so much more access to a lot of the spells that you're going to get access to from the land druid in a bunch of different ways. If we look at the spore druid doesn't provide enough survivability to really justify the 4 levels. All the really fun stuff from spore druid comes at level 6. So it just kind of sits in, again, in a funky position. If you look at it with a monk, it's different, right? But then again, you're taking a heavier investment into monk, making you more of a melee character. Even if you're with a 4 elements monk and a cleric or a druid here, it's still a little bit more of an interesting dip that I just don't really justify. And a moon druid, then 4 levels of moon druid, you can't do any casting aside from concentration abilities or stuff you do beforehand. And with 4 levels of moon druid, you're going to very quickly outpace what the moon druid can do, because every couple of levels, the moon druid's wild shapes get an increase to their health, but those levels are not character levels. They have to be druid levels. So I think druid exists down here in D tier as well. Let's now move into our C tier. Now C tier affords some pretty fun utility, but it doesn't really offer a whole ton that the other classes just don't do better or whatever it is. Remember, C is still average, right? It's still a pretty good kind of by multi-class list by comparison. So the first one here is the monk. And monk, as far as open hand or shadow monk goes, maybe isn't the best pick, but it can afford you some unarmored defense. It can afford you some quick reflexes. Actually at 4 levels, I think quick reflexes at level 6. But it could increase your movement speed. It gives you some unarmored defense as it pertains to wisdom. So if you are going with a cleric, you can just not wear armor and take monk and get a huge increase to your AC. That's a kind of a cool little shtick you can go with. And even then too, a war cleric with the open hand monk 4 levels, that's a real potent combination. But I think, unfortunately, when we're looking at all this, and that still kind of strikes me as more of like a melee character, right? But still, even though you can have a lot of fun with cleric casting spells, you can do a lot of cool things with monk, but I think that monk ultimately wants to be up close and personal. Even with the 4 elements monk, it still wants to be an up close and personal type of character. And I think somewhere in the world, the 4 elements monk, and I bring this up a lot because the 4 elements monk is my personal favorite monk, but I think that it just needs a lot more level investment to make it really feel strong and punchy. 4 elements, shadow, what have you. So when it comes to casting, I think it still stays down here in C because it does have some application, especially to kind of help out with the other casting classes that maybe gives them a little AC or movement. But other than that, I think it's fine right down here. Now, the other one at C is kind of I juggled between this being in B or C. It's maybe like a C plus B minus, depending on, because we're only taking 4 levels, right? Song of Rest, though, is great. Jack of all trades is great. It doesn't give us a ton of extra points when it comes to skills that we don't have a proficiency in, but it's still, that kind of helps out. You know, you didn't plan on making an Arcana check, and now you got to do it. Or you didn't plan on making a survival check, and now you got to do it. And Jack of all trades is just going to help you out with those little tiny things. And in addition to it as well, you get an additional proficiency. Now, with 4 levels, you do miss out on the Bardic Inspirations being replenished on a short rest. You miss out on magical secrets if you're a lore bard, but you still get the ability to take advantage of Bardic Inspirations when it comes to cutting words. So I think a lore bard 4 levels into another caster is still a very, very, very strong multi-class, because cutting words is an amazing way to kind of tip something over the edge that they just barely saved or what have you. I really struggled between putting this in C or B, but I think all the things in B felt so much stronger than a Bard multi-class that it sat down here at C for me. And I think, too, it also depends on, right? Like if I'm looking at a Bard as it pertains to a Sorcerer or a Warlock, yeah, that's super strong. But if I'm looking at it as it pertains to a Cleric, a what's that other one called? A Druid, a Wizard, it doesn't feel as strong because I'm going to have to kind of navigate things. And what we're going to start to take a look at here as we progress up this list is multi-classing other casting classes that have different spell casting abilities. And it's important to note that even though it has a different spell casting ability, it doesn't mean that it's a completely wasted class, right? Like if I were to take a bard and a wizard, intelligence and charisma, if I put 6 levels into both, it doesn't really matter, because if I'm taking spells from the Bard class that don't require rolls, then it doesn't matter what my charisma is. And what I mean by that is, maybe I'll use a better example here with Wizard. Wizard, if I were to take Magic Missile, it doesn't matter if my intelligence is 8 or if my intelligence is 22. Magic Missile is an attack roll. If I were to go ahead and go with, meaning it's measured against their AC. If I were to take a healing capability, a lot of times that is more often than not based off of your spellcasting capability. A buff such as Death Ward, Resist Poison, Heroism, those are not dependent upon your spellcasting ability. So as we kind of go through this list and you're thinking about how can I add that class into mine, that multi-class, just think that it's not always a bad thing if there's 2 different spellcasting abilities if you pull from different portions of their kind of spell repertoire. Another good example here would be the Wizard and the Globe of Invulnerability, one of the strongest spells in the game. There's no spellcasting really like DC requirement to that. You just cast it down. It's just there for you. So you're kind of thinking about those things as we progress up, but let's now go into that B tier. So with B tier, we're going to get some fun things added in. And the first one is going to be that Warlock. And Warlock is really, really a fun class. You can just do so much with it. You can go in so many different directions. Do you want to go into a blade lock, whatever it is? But both the Pact of the Tome and Pact of the Chain afford a lot of really cool things for any kind of just generic casting character. Just simply 4 levels into it is a really cool way to jump into things. Even just 2 levels. My honor mode playthrough was a 2-level Bard lock. So 2 levels into Warlock with the Pact of the Chain to get that summon to help me out to do fears, be invisible. It can use whatever it needs to do in those circumstances. But mainly what that did for me was give me a really strong cantrip in Eldritch Blast. And using my Eldritch Invocations, turning that ability into Eldritch Blast, adding in my Charisma modifier and Devil Eyes. So I am never able to be blinded, right? So those capabilities alone are just so strong. And if I go with a great old one Warlock, now my crit strikes fear things. Doesn't matter if it's from a spell, if it's from a weapon, whatever it is, a crit strike is going to fear something. That's a really great capability to add in. And if I'm a wizard, yeah, maybe my charisma is not as big of a focus, so that doesn't feel as strong. Or same thing if I'm a cleric or a druid, but still having the capability to have my crit strikes fear things, have access to puberty, have access to spells like Armor of Agathis. That isn't going to be based off my charisma, right? It's going to be based off of my spell casting. What's it called? Spellcasting, spell slot, the spell slot that's being cast with it, right? Having access to these capabilities that aren't necessarily tied to my spellcasting ability are really great boons of being a warlock. Having just a cool summon, having the ability to jump into some fun stuff is, I think, what makes this a really good B tier and one that spices very well too, especially if we're looking at something like a sorcerer or a lore bard, stuff like that. And like I said, my lore bard, 10 lore bard to warlock was a really strong combination, and people were kind of looking, well, why only just take 2 levels into warlock? Because again, Devil's Sight and then having a very strong cantrip. Eldritch Blast is with that the increase to its charisma is such a strong cantrip, because cantrips, remember, they don't use spell slots. So having basically a reliable, really solid thing that you can do on an action every turn without exhausting a spell slot is so huge with a caster. So having that on demand is great. So that's why I really kind of put that here at B. Now, the other one at B is a cleric. And it's because the cleric can really just go every direction. You can be anything with a cleric. You can be a melee character. You can be more of a kind of like bardic character with a knowledge cleric by adding a lot of proficiencies and fun spicy stuff there. You can jump into more of a druid route by going the nature cleric. You can go more of a rogue route and go with trickery. So I think that the cleric adds a lot of fun direction for the class. And even moreover, you can do a lot of really fun things with cleric, because you can amp up your thunder spells, right? You can go to the Tempest Cleric and you can lean in harder to your sorcerer or your wizard capabilities. And I think that is such a potent combination with the cleric. And at level 4 too, you aren't getting a lot of the really good spells that you would get at level 5, right? But still at level 4, you get plenty of good spells to tango with. If you go into a life cleric, you're going to add a lot of healing into maybe your offensive spell casting. So this gives you a lot of viability in a lot of ways to kind of differentiate and spice up your character. And like I said too, a lot of the healing capabilities are not necessarily based off of your wisdom. Now, the life cleric's capabilities, their actual channel divinity stuff, it might be, but we don't need to worry about that if we're just trying to kind of have a little bit of spice here and there, a little bit of buff here and there from the cleric. All right, now we're getting into a lot of the heavy hitters here. The guys that add a lot of character to a lot of the spellcasters. And the first one is the paladin. Now, the argument can be made here that what I'm about to talk about is a melee character, and that is true, but in the melee video, I talked about the paladin being a really good multi-class because of the martial capabilities that it adds in. And something that I didn't talk about with the cleric that the paladin does do is just add in so many proficiencies to your character. If I'm going to play a cleric, I now get medium armor and shield proficiency. That is huge. Now I can use a staff and a shield, and that shield can be the one that increases initiative. It's the one that can give me fire shield, whatever it is. I get that as a paladin, and then moreover, I can jump into heavy armor and still cast spells. So I can be a juggernaut in heavy armor with an abjuration wizard that can just take all the damage in the world. But one of the most important things of paladin is its smites, right? And your smite is not based off of your charisma. It's based off of the spell slot used. So 2 levels into paladin and 10 levels into sorcerer, a Sorkadin is a very strong character. 2 levels into paladin, 10 levels into sword bard is a bardadin, but you could easily go lore bard if you wanted. You don't really get the benefit of doing the flourishes, right? But you could go with that and still use those, still be an offensive melee character, but have all the casting capabilities of the lore bard. Jump into 2 sets of magical secrets at 6 and at 10 as a 10 level lore bard, but then have all these spell slots to also smite things. You have your wizard you could jump into and do abjuration with it. Whatever it is, you can do cleric, you can do druid. It doesn't matter. The fact that you're just simply adding a smite in and having that smite do the damage that it does is a really great pick. And I just think too that the paladin, all those proficiencies added in, it's just such a good, solid option. Now, the other one here is the rogue. And I actually thought about putting rogue into B tier. Hear me out. Adding an extra bonus action is really good. It's always a good thing to have extra actions in this game. Action or bonus action doesn't matter. But I will say that the amount of characters that can benefit from a bonus action in the casting realm are, in my opinion, smaller than the ones in the melee realm, because I know that there are spells that are cast with bonus action. And because in the melee realm, okay, I am a berserker and I'm going to use my bonus action to do another round of enraged damage. Or I'm using Great Weapon Master, so now I'm going to use my bonus action to do another hit with my Great Weapon Master proc. I am a dual wielding character. I'm going to use an extra bonus action to do another offhand attack, or to use any of the abilities, any of the weapons that give me a bonus action ability. There are so many ways in the melee realm I can benefit from a bonus action, but in the casting realm, I need to specifically take Quickened Spell from the Sorcerer's meta magic in order to make my bonus action have the same level of punch of a melee character. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that it's bad, right? Because Dimension Door, I think, is an action, but Misty Step, Hex, Healing Word, those are all bonus actions. Summoning Spiritual Weapon, that's a bonus action. Those are still strong bonus actions to take. Mobility, healing, placing on their body on the battlefield, reducing someone's, or giving disadvantage on specific rolls and adding in necrotic damage from Hex. Those are all really strong bonus actions. I just don't think that the Thief is the S tier that it is in melee. You can definitely disagree with me on that. Again, I just kind of think that I get more mileage of my bonus actions in melee than I do from a caster, because if I'm not specifically a sorcerer, then I'm not going to get the most out of it. So that's my stance on rogue right there. But since we're talking about sorcerer, it's up here as well in that A tier. Originally, I had this in B, but I felt like it just didn't make sense, because sorcerer at 4 levels gives me meta magic, and meta magic is going to benefit every single caster that I want to be. If I want to be a warlock, a wizard, it doesn't matter, because meta magic is not going to use my spell casting capability. It just simply uses my sorcerer points, right? And almost all of the meta magic abilities are one sorcery point. Twinned, extended, distant, careful, one sorcery point. And I'm going to get 4 sorcery points if I put 4 full levels into sorcerer. And that's great, right? Because at 4 levels too, I can tap into magic missile, mage armor, shield, ray of sickness, all really great spells. And that's just 1 level into it. And if I want to go with a subclass like Draconic Bloodline, I get the Draconic Resilience, I get Draconic Hit Points, or Storm Sorcery is going to give me Tempestuous Magic so I can float around whenever I cast any spell. It's not simply thunder or lightning spells. I can use a fly as a bonus action if I use any spell with Tempestuous Magic. And that's only 2 levels invested. And even then, too, that's going to get me access to Knock, Scorching Ray, Shatter, stuff like that. Or if I jump... actually, that's level 5 to jump into those, but still, four levels gives me those 4 sorcery points, gives me a feat. I can have a lot of fun with that. And of course, too, at that 4th level, or actually it's 3rd level, you get it, but you get Quicken Spell, where now I can use 3 of those sorcery points and cast a spell as a bonus action that would have otherwise taken an action. So I think Sorcerer adds a lot of really strong flavoring into any caster, but it's even stronger if I threw it in with a wizard, right? Because I can use Arcane Recovery to recover spell slots and convert those spell slots into sorcery points using the meta magic capabilities. So these things work so well in conjunction with one another. And you can probably see what's coming up in S tier, but let's now move into S tier. So our final 2 boys in the block, it's going to be Wizard and Fighter, of course, right? I'll just put them both up there. There's no mistake. We know it's coming. And these 2 add a lot, right? 1 level into Wizard makes it so I can cast any spell that I scribe into my Wizard spellbook. Of course, your Wizard spell slots are going to depend upon your intelligence modifier plus your wisdom, your Wizard level. So if I'm 10 intelligence in Wizard level 1, I only have 1 spell slot, but you can kind of pick and choose what goes in that spot. So I could put in Conjure Elemental, conjure my Elemental, and then remove it and put something else in. I can use the Sealy spell to summon a diva and then remove it and put Conjure Elemental and cast that, and put Minor Elemental and cast that. So you can have a bunch of different things that you can use with that single Wizard spell slot. And in addition to it too, remember, you can use stuff like Globe of Invulnerability, which is a level 6 spell, level 5 spell slot. But I can just put it in after I've casted all my summons and then go to town. So you can have a lot of fun using that Wizard spell slot to tap into any spell within the game for the most part, right? You can't use divine spells you can't scribe divine spells. So you have a huge amount of access there. You do get Arcane Recovery. It does recover some spell slots. It's not going to be as huge since you're not going to get a ton of use out of it. But what I really like about Wizard, especially when it comes to multiclassing as a caster, is being able to tap into the Wizard schools. So I can jump into Abjuration and add a ton of survivability to any of my caster classes. I can add Evocation, which is great because if I just take the levels to get Evocation Wizardry School, then Careful spells, the sorcerer meta magic, I don't need to use it because now all my evocation spells don't do damage to my friends. It's the same thing if I'm casting them through what's it called? Not a life, but a light cleric, right? I have Firewall, I have Flame Strike, I have Fireball, I have all these things that could possibly hurt my friends. Not if I have the levels to make myself an evocation wizard. So you have a lot of really cool, fun ways that you can make all of your spellcasting better with a wizard involved in your multiclassing situation. And lastly, we have the Fighter. Now the Fighter, kind of just on paper, I think a lot of people look at it and go, oh, cool, yeah, so Action Surge. Yeah, Action Surge, of course, is going to be huge because while getting an additional bonus action isn't as strong in my mind, getting an additional action is always going to be strong. And what's nice too about a Fighter, which is similar to the Sorcerer, which I totally forgot to bring up in the Sorcerer's portion, is that both the Fighter and the Sorcerer give you Constitution proficiency, meaning you're going to add your proficiency modifier, either a 2, a 3, or a 4, depending on your level, to any concentration save you're going to be making. So I could start as a Fighter, 1 level into Fighter, let's just say put 2 levels into Fighter, right? Put our first 2 levels into Fighter, gets us Action Surge. And now we have proficiency in Constitution. We have a fighting style. We can go with defense style to add more plus 1 AC if I'm wearing armor. And I can wear all armor. I can use all weapons if I need to or want to. It's got a lot of really fun stuff added into it. And then it gets crazier once I put a 3rd or 4th level into fighter, because I can go with champion, and now my spells will crit on a 19 and a 20. And if I want to get spell sniper, my spells will now crit on a 17, no, an 18, a 19, or a 20. Or if I want to go Eldritch Knight, it gives me access to shield and magic missile that either I would not have had on another class, or it frees up a slot on another class to use it, right? So if I have a sorcerer and I go with Eldritch Knight, well, now I don't need to take shield or magic missile on my sorcerer. I can just use them through the reactions built in from my Eldritch Knight. So you get a lot of really good stuff that the fighter adds into every spellcaster. Do you need to go 3, 4 deep? No, you do not need to do that at all. You can just simply go 2 levels and get a ton of benefit. You could simply just go 1 level and just get that constitution proficiency and all access to all martial, simple, and armored, and shield. That's another big one too, right? So I think that fighter again sits there as king, as the S tier of all what's it called? All multi-classing, right? It's like melee and casting both benefit from fighter in it, because it's as good. My good old buddy Remorta says, it's just like bacon, right? You're adding in action surge. It's making everything better. It's always going to just benefit everything across the board. So in conclusion, here is our entire list, which we've now seen. But I think that it makes a lot of sense the way these things are divvied up, and I think you get a little turbulent as you look at the A through C columns. Or rows, and kind of deciding where, hey, you know what, I have sorcerer in a B, or I've got bard up at A, whatever it is. I think that this is where it really kind of gets messy, is A through C. But I think S and D are, for the most part, I think pretty well set in stone. I don't think there's many combinations I'd want to sprinkle in with these. At the level of impact we're talking about, the penetration we're talking about of only 4 levels. That dip just doesn't really justify the latter 3 versus the former 2, which are just so strong, right? But go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. Do you really feel that you could put one of these D or C multi-class character subclasses, whatever I'm trying to say, into another row? Let me know in the comment section below. Or conversely too, do you think I've ranked something way too high that needs to be way lower? Love to hear your opinions as always, guys, because this is purely anecdotal. It is me kind of looking at very specific things in my own mind, but maybe you've come up with a way better way of approaching this that I didn't even think of. And remember too, this is a single player narrative game. So if you've looked at this and gone, oh shit, dude, I was going to multi-class in with Ranger, then do it. Who cares? You're going to have fun. You're going to be able to beat the game. You're not going to run up against something, oh man, if only I had not had 4 levels of Ranger, I think my character would have really pulled through. You have 3 other characters in your party. So you're not going to be the one that drags everyone down. Don't worry about it. Have fun. Enjoy the game how you want to. But as always, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.